In order to create my design, I used a stencil and did an outline with one of my fine tips. I am now going back with my horseshoe shaped tips in order to achieve greater dimensions and make the grooves a little bit more larger. The tip I'm currently using is a horseshoe shape tip 2CF. There are three angles to this tip. It is an angled oval shape. It is really easy to use this tip in all three ways, depending on what you're trying to accomplish. At the moment, I am actually angling my tip face up and using it to push out the isomalt as if it were a small shovel. I am at the moment angling it to the side and moving forward in order to create the rest of my circular shape. These tips are very easy to use. It just depends on what you want to do. When working with isomalt or other mediums, it is always easier to bring the pen towards you versus away from you in order to work on your medium. When you are working towards you, you are gliding your hand with ease. If you're pushing away from you, you're having to push into the isomalt or other mediums in order to create your design, which makes it a little bit harder to maneuver your pen. Should this be the case, always pick up your piece with your other hand and angle it so that it is easier for you to maneuver your pen when working with your design. For this portion, I am using the top part of the oval tip to create a deeper groove. I am slanting my tip at a side angle to smoothen out the edges. As I mentioned earlier, it is always easier to bring the pen towards you when working with isomalt versus pushing it away from you. It does take practice and patience. Work slowly until you're happy you have the design that way that you want it, so then you can come back in with additional tips and create even more dimension. Once you're happy with the small tip, change to a larger tip. For this next phase, we will be using the oval shape horseshoe tip 3CF in order to obtain certain areas with larger dimensions. I have switched the angle of my camera so that you can see how I am positioning my tip in order to enlarge in some of the areas and remove the isomalt. For this area, I have angled my tip upside down and using the top part in order to define the circular area of the design. You can also use this tip to smoothen out areas that are a little bit rough and extend portions of your design a little bit further and give them more definition towards the end. When you're using your tip at an angle, you are creating a groove and also a wall on the side. Now I am smoothing out the part to give it more depth for dimension. I am basically pushing out the isomalt and removing it, then coming back into the design, creating a smoother wall. Notice how I have my tip at an almost upside down position, and I am coming down and turning it to a more upright position as I reach the end of my design. This makes the upper portion of your design look thinner and it widens as it's coming down. I am using the same method in this portion. I am starting with my tip, come down, and then I angle around from the other side and use my tip flat in order to have a larger groove. I give this area a little bit more fine tuning with the top part of my tip and dig in a little deeper so that it has more of a groove to give a bit more dimension. Here comes the little tricky part. I am literally using my tip upside down and coming down at an angle while pushing the isomalt to create texture to overlap on the edge. You do have to do this several times. Do it slowly and make sure to lift just before you reach the tip and leave the isomalt there so that it starts building. Continue to dig little by little, pushing the isomalt towards you to create texture overlapping on the side. I am using the same pull and build method in this one area. Sometimes I do come underneath to lift the isomalt up if it is going down the edge in order to bring it back up. I am building a point angle and bringing the isomalt out and pushing it over so that it creates an overlapping tip. Notice how I am moving my pen. I start with the upper part of my tip, and as I am coming down, I am doing a half circular motion while straightening out my tip and then ending back at the point. I am now using my tip to pull the isomalt down, creating a groove and a wall at the same time. As I mentioned in the beginning, there are three ways that you can angle this tip to create different texture and dimensions. In this one portion, I am angled to the side as I'm creating a groove and pulling the isomalt to overlap the edge. Now I have my tip upside down to smoothen out the borders and bring the isomalt out a bit more. Again, in this area, I come in with my tip at an angle and building a wall and a groove at the same time. I continue to do this motion as I pull the isomalt out to the edge to create the illusion of an overlap. When you are creating an overlap, make sure to also manipulate the isomalt on the sides and underneath to position it the way you want. For this portion, I am using several methods with my tip. I am angled face down with the tip point creating the groove. I also slant my tip to the side in some areas. And now I am really digging in to create a deeper groove for a more dimensional look. I have my tip slightly angled upside down. I'm using the top part to dig underneath and pull out the isomalt. And then I bring it to a slight angle. I have my tip slightly slanted and I am removing some of the isomalt as I am creating a wall and a groove at the same time. Using the top portion of my tip at an angle, I am digging a deeper groove while creating a wall. If you don't want to remove the isomalt and just build it, it is best to use your tip angled upside down or to the side. That way, when you are pulling the isomalt, you're not scooping it up with the tip and removing it. You are manipulating it and building walls to create a dimension. I am creating this crevice with the top part of the tip and it's angled upside down and slightly to the side. And I start to push the isomalt out in a circular motion. I then start to come back around the opposite way, creating a groove and a wall for a dimensional look. You can manipulate the isomalt in any direction that you want with your tip. You can also use this tip to remove isomalt in areas you don't want it. Watch as I slowly manipulate the isomalt towards the end to build up walls for a dimensional look. I am just allowing the heat from my tip to melt the isomalt and manipulating it into the areas I want it to accumulate. I now come to the other side and use the same method. My tip is upside down and I am letting the isomalt heat up as I am pulling it and shaping it. You can continue to use this method, manipulating your isomalt to bring your walls up even higher. Again, I always start with a slant using mostly the tip. As I am coming down in a half circular motion, I start flattening out my tip so that I could get a wider dimension towards the end. If you find it difficult to maneuver your tips on occasion when creating some designs, find what works best for you. It's always easiest to maintain your pen stable and maneuver it with your fingers and hold your piece with your left hand to help you. I am using my tip to dig in deep and remove the isomalt. I want to create the illusion that it is cut in this area. Use the flat portion of your tip to smoothen out the isomalt, extending it and then reshaping the ends. Sometimes I don't always follow my stenciling. I find areas that do need to have some texture, so I just go in with my tip and start adding. Here I am using the same method as we have done before. I slightly angle my tip and start to create a groove and a wall simultaneously. I use a half circular motion, manipulating my isomalt and extending it out as far as I want it. I give it a moment to cool and look at it and manipulate it a little bit more if needed. Again, I am using the same method here as I am manipulating the isomalt on one side and then the other. I will be using this same method in various areas where I manipulate the isomalt with my tip on angles. I will also be removing isomalt where not needed and blending in isomalt in areas that I want to create a deeper groove. Again, I am applying the same method of manipulating the isomalt here. You can do this with every one of your horseshoe shaped tips. It all depends on what size you would like to have in your design. As I suggested, I always start out with my smaller tip and gradually build up with the larger ones depending on how I want it to look. I am manipulating the isomalt to create an actual teardrop versus a circle in this one area. Once I am happy with the way I have shaped the inner portion, I come and start manipulating the isomalt from the outer sides. In this section, I am using what I call a little claw tip, which is labeled R in the new tip set. All I am doing is coming at an angle, applying slight pressure to make sure that both ends dig in deep enough to create that groove. You don't want it to be too hot because then it will overmelt your isomalt and come back in. So coming over it several times will give you a very clean definition. I am now coming back and creating a bit more depth in certain areas and fine tuning some of my edges. I have changed my tip back to the smallest one, which is 2CF. When you are starting a design, always start with your smallest tip and gradually increase the size in order to create broader areas. When you are done, you can always come back with your smallest tip again and fine tune certain areas and smoothen out certain edges. Another little tip, if you don't like the way your edges look, you can use your tip to smoothen them out, then come back around underneath it and give it the groove again.